A night to remember. Jane pulled up to a multi-story mansion with her friend Lucy in her small car. The mansion had a large murky lake behind it and was separated from a majority of society by a thickly wooded area. Jane's car steadily approached a heavy iron gate with a small keypad attached to a deserted guardhouse. Lucy broke the silence in her awe. "I cannot believe you didn't even know your great-aunt and she left you a place like this. It's huge." Jane nodded her head enthusiastically and mumbled something in agreement while she looked down at the law office's letter, which, as a side note, included the gate's key code. 7254, she whispered under her breath while she typed the numbers in from the open window of her car. Jane pulled into the round driveway and her and Lucy hurried into the house. It was almost nightfall. Jane decided not to unpack yet, but instead took time admiring the delicately placed furniture and old pictures before running up to the top floor to find a room. She chose a room with the bed on the far side of the room away from the window, turned off the light, and went to sleep. "Jane, Jane, come here!" Lucy's cries echoed through the house. "I'm coming," Jane mumbled. Jane rolled her feet out of the bed. She lazily opened her eyes and realized her bed was right by the huge window panes. She scrunched up her face in curiosity, but went to find Lucy. As she exited the room, she felt a cool breeze, but she let it go, still wondering how her bed had moved. As she passed by the library, a book hit her on the side of her face. It was covered in warm, sticky goo. She tentatively opened it and skipped through it. Every page was splattered with a variety of weird shapes and symbols, until she reached the end, and in sloppy red paint it read, "Choose, your life or hers." Jane shrieked and threw it back into the darkness, where it just slid back out and hit her foot. Jane panicked and started yelling threatening things into the darkness. "Jane, Jane, is that you?" a voice gasped between sobs. "Yes, where are you, Luce?" Jane replied. "I went to the dining room and was looking at some picture, and a secret door opened. Then I called your name and was just standing here when somebody pushed me in." Lucy sounded a little bit calmer now, but still slightly paranoid. "Okay, I'll try and find the door." Jane tentatively moved into the dining room. The book stayed where it was. "Did you do something for the door to open?" she inquired, as she stood in front of the only picture present in the room. "No," Lucy answered bluntly. Jane scooted her foot across the carpet nonchalantly and hit a bump in the carpet near the wall. She tripped a little and caught herself on the picture, which then suddenly flipped, having her fall into Lucy. Lucy screamed, and Jane, who had the breath knocked out of her, tried to reassure her panicky friend. "Lucy, Lucy, calm yourself. Everything's all right." Lucy nodded and turned sharply, leading Jane by the hand, Lucy's nails digging into the back of Jane's hand. "Luce, there's a fork up ahead," Jane started to say, but Lucy cut her off. "Jane, get me out of here." Her pale face was tear-stricken, and her green eyes were full of fear. Her pale, dyed blonde hair was disheveled. Suddenly, her Napoleon Dynamite figure straightened up, as if she had come to some realization, and she said, "Okay, you know what, Jane? If worse comes to worse, I have lived long enough." She went to the left of the fork, and her figure disappeared into the tunnel. Jane quickly walked to the right fork, breathing quietly. It felt like it had been forever when a sound echoed through the silence. It sounded out again. "Lucy," Jane thought. She did a 180 and ran through the tight hallways. Then suddenly, bam! The lights to the whole building went out. "Oh my gosh, where is Lucy? I should have never come here and brought her." The hallway opened up a bit, and Jane felt around and managed to find the left fork. Her last words were, "I've lived long enough. Please let her have been wrong. Let her be okay. It was just a spider. She screamed just because of a spider. Come on, Jane. Find her," Jane thought. One light flickered on near Jane. Relief flowed through her. "She's all right," Jane thought. She smiled and ran towards the light, expecting to see her friend laughing with a dead spider at her feet or tangled up in spider webs. When she came to the light, Lucy was facing away from her in a chair, with her cell phone on the floor below her, casting very little light. Jane walked over, relieved, and put her hand on Lucy's shoulder, and Lucy fell down. All the lights popped on, and a knife was coming out of her back. On her arm was cut marks that sloppily read, "Too late." "Oh my gosh! Lucy!" Jane died inside. She ran for her life. She ran into a room that she saw had a phone earlier and locked herself in it. She ran over to the phone and picked it up. No dial tone! Jane panicked even more. Jane looked to see why the phone wasn't working. The wire had been cut. "Okay, wait. My cell phone should be a couple of rooms down from here. If only I could get there without being seen," Jane thought. She quietly opened the door with only a small squeak accompanying it, but quickly closed it after she saw a shadow around the corner. She peeked from under the door and watched a pair of shoes start to walk past her door. Jane held her breath as the shoes stopped. The person did a double take before again pausing at the door, but as quickly as the pair of shoes came, they left. Jane gasped for air. She was hyperventilating, but managed to gather her thoughts, and she scurried down the hall into her room and closed the door. She searched her bag for her phone, and then under her bed, then the jeans she wore yesterday, but her phone was nowhere. Her eyes rested on the window, where her phone was precariously balanced on a balcony's edge. Jane didn't want to take the chance of being seen, but she needed that phone. But suddenly, a gunshot pierced the air near her phone. Jane squealed, but quickly covered her mouth. A few more shots fired before the phone toppled off the edge of the balcony and crashed to the ground. Something suddenly rubbed against Jane's leg. She leapt back and looked down to see a fluffy black and white cat rubbing at her feet. "Hi there, kitty," Jane said, out of breath. The cat meowed, looked up at Jane. She bent down and started to rub the cat when a shadow fell over her head. She slowly looked up to see a man in all black and a mask. The only thing Jane could see was his dark, glistening eyes and the smirk on his smug face. A gun cocked, and Jane closed her eyes. After a few moments of nothing happening, she opened one of her eyes to see all the lights turned on. The man was being unmasked by several police officers, and handcuffs were being locked around his hands. In the distance, a few sirens sounded. After the man was escorted out of the room, a police officer came up to Jane with a sheriff's badge. "Hello, ma'am. 2 young boys in the lake behind this house informed us that they heard screaming and gunshots, but everything's going to be okay." And those were just the words that Jane was waiting for.